Let's give it a go. Good morning, California.
Good morning, Mark. I'm just speaking on behalf of the entire state of California here.
Exactly. Good morning to everybody in California. How is California doing this morning?
Well, we're being ravaged by a global pandemic, but other than that, I think it's pretty cool. The sun is shining.
Yeah, you got that. You got that. I mean, it's kind of gray and gross out here. Yeah. I better introduce you before we get much further. Folks, brand DIYers, meet Maggie Langrick. She is CEO and publisher at Wonderwell Books. And she is also a brand DIY member. And she has got something very, very interesting to share with us, because I know each of you is harboring this secret desire to be the next James Altucher or Stephen King or whatever. And she's here to give you the go or the no-go. And I think this is super important. It's a super important discussion, because I get a lot of calls from people going, I should get up on stage. I should get 5,000 a pop to get up on stage and do a talk. And I should write a book. And after scratching my head a little bit, I always go, how come? So let's start with that question. Why should an entrepreneur or founder or somebody in brand DIY group, why should they entertain the idea of writing a book?
Great question. And it's one that I think so many people are asking themselves right now. Before I dive into the answer, Mark, I just want to put my background and our company in context for your listeners and for the viewers a little bit. So I founded our company Livestream Media about 7 years ago, and it was just last year that we underwent a change over to Wonderwell. So wonderwell.press is our website. We are a premium hybrid publisher of nonfiction books that help, heal, and inspire. Our books have been placed on national bestseller lists. We have won awards. They have been sold to traditional publishers around the world and translated into multiple languages. So that's the space that I'm coming from. Okay. So
what was the question again?
The question is, should I do it? Like, will this help?
Should an entrepreneur do it? And how come?
So there's a heck of a lot of activity in this space right now, and the lines of definition have been blurred over the years since self-publishing came around, and it just became something. Writing and publishing a book went from being something that was just super rare and only the anointed would be invited to do. It's now something that people can choose to do themselves. And so, en masse, everyone has rushed into that space. And many people are doing it. It now sort of almost feels like it's the cost of doing business. It's like the price of entry, like it's table stakes. Like you have to have a book.
I'm a chronic I got to interrupt. I'm a chronic interrupter. Yeah. There's a whole school of douchebags on Facebook, YouTube pre-roll ads who are out there going, if you're not shooting everything on YouTube videos, you're a loser. If you're not writing a book, if you're not there's all these people who are managing to convince me it's this business pain porn, this sort of, I don't know, this sort of Gary Vee school that you got to go hard. And they're like fitness trainers. And you're like, who are these guys?
I really think, sure. And you can listen to all of that. And I get sucked into it as well, sort of thinking like, oh, I've got to be on every platform. I should be, doing this. I should be doing podcasts. I should be doing webinars. I should be doing blah, 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 like everything, right? And the truth is you can only do so much. I mean, there reaches a point if your business, grows. Maybe you can tack on all of those parts and be really omni-channel, and that's amazing. But realistically, I believe that we should do the things that we are great at and that make sense for us to do in terms of these two things: your goals. Why are you doing it? And what are you hoping to get out of it specifically? Not this vague goal of like becoming a thought leader, yes, but what does that look like? Oh, my goal is, you mentioned speaking fees. That's a really great goal. Or your goal is to, many of our authors are consultants or coaches. And so for them, it's not just about increasing the flow of new business into their companies, but also raising the quality of the client that they will, that they will attract. So those are really good, tangible goals. And writing a book may be part of that. Here is, I think, so before we get into really, I want to help everyone watching to to understand whether it makes sense for them, like what your goals are, and what their goals are, and then whether or not they have how to assess yourself to determine whether you have a realistic chance of meeting that goal. So before we get into that, I just want to break down my definition, which, I didn't make up. This is sort of like the traditional definition, but really understanding what do we mean by a book? What even is a book?
Yeah, what is a book? Because you and I have had
different,
you and I talked right past each other when it came to our first conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So so a book is fundamentally a knowledge product. It's a vehicle for information or an idea. That is what it is. The format to me does not matter. We do publish physical books as well as ebooks. That's not important. That's not an important part of it's not a defining characteristic as far as I'm concerned. The book is really a vehicle for the ideas contained within it. So I think, traditionally we talked about, the books used to be very, very hard to put forward. And so one of the enduring characteristics, the real characteristics, I think, of what makes a book, as opposed to just a bunch of words collected in a document, is that it should have a big idea that advances the public understanding of that topic. It should have new information, entirely new information in the form of primary research or a unique methodology, or something that the author, and remember, like, we're thinking of the word author as not just the person whose name is on it, but the originator of the ideas contained within it. That's really the kind of like the most basic definition of an author. The author should have new information or a very novel and new interpretation of old information, right? So you might not be reinventing the wheel, but it's like, look at this wheel on its head, or from another side. Or its main value may be in entertainment. And when I say entertainment, I don't just mean humor or something. I'm also talking about, like, great literature is entertainment, right? We read it to feel something, be inspired and enriched emotionally or culturally or intellectually. So that is what a book is. And I think that another extremely important historical definition of, or a defining characteristic of a book, which has really gotten sort of morphed and changed recently, is that a book is different from more ephemeral media, like a blog post or a newspaper article. I used to work in newspapers. I was a newspaper editor at the Vancouver Sun. I was the arts and life editor there. And in the newspaper trade, there's newspapers are often called fish wrap, which, I mean, basically means, today's news, so this important thing that we're all toiling to create, is the thing that's going to line bird cages tomorrow. So it's easy come, easy go, next. It's a conveyor belt of new content, and its value is in its freshness and its timeliness. A book is different. A book's value is in its ability to endure. So this should be something which is not irrelevant tomorrow, which can stand the test of time, and ideally, which continues to provide, provoke thought and provide real value to the sort of public consciousness for a long time to come. So those are my definitions of what a book really is.
Awesome. Okay, now I forgot the question.
I should also kind of counterpoint that by saying, because we spoke about this earlier, and that there are lots of folks that want to publish a book as a piece of marketing content, and their book may not tick any of those boxes. It's like, well, my idea is not exactly new. My methodology is pretty kind of like industry standard, but I have my own original voice. And anyway, I'm not wrong. All my content is solid. Like I can say this from a place of authority, and maybe, famous authors have already said it, but is that a reason not to publish? Maybe, maybe not. So I do want to really acknowledge that there is a place, there is a role for a book that is not necessarily groundbreaking or meeting all of those high bars that I just mentioned, that can perform a really important role as a piece of marketing content. You're going to put it, perhaps you're going to make it available for free download because you're not interested in making money. You just want people to read your ideas. Sometimes it's about the credibility of just having your name on the cover, or being able to say author of, or to prove that you can do it, and to prove that you do have those professional chops. Or, it might even be, it might even have another reason to write a book might be just purely for your own self gratification. I did this, I really wanted to express these things.
New Year's resolution.
It's my legacy. It's just like, exactly. It's a marathon that I'm going to run and finish, and so those things are valid, but those are very different reasons for writing and reasons for publishing, and they really come into play when you're talking about your publishing strategy.
Now, when I wrote my book, I talked to a lot of people and I said, what's the best reason to write a book? Just to clarify, if I'm, because everybody falls in love with the idea of a book. But what is a book and should I be doing it? I asked this question too. And I heard at the time, the book is the world's best business card. When people are handing out business card and you have a book that you say, well, you check out my book on Amazon, you elevate in people's eyes a little bit. Now, I found that kind of bullshit. What I discovered was that a book wasn't necessarily the world's best business card. The book was almost the best, if you've got a BA or a university degree, it's a way of saying to people, this book shows that I've gone a little bit deeper and I've spent time. It's a form of
accreditation, right? Yeah.
In the thinking behind my methodology. I don't just spew it out. And I found that made a lot more sense. And, I taught university and I designed courses. And what I discovered was the most fascinating thing about designing a course, even a marketing or a brand course, was that I didn't know half the stuff that I had to put in the course. And so the course forced me to learn it. I've heard a lot of authors, especially methodology authors, the how-to authors, who start a book and go, oh my good God, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be talking about. So you learn as you write. And when you come out of it, it's very rewarding because you go, I sorted all this garbage in my head out, put it in order and made it so that other folks could have it. And that's personally what I found rewarding. It was really good for sorting the garbage out in my head, putting it in order so other people could absorb it. That helped me.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And also there's a lot of like implicit knowledge that we have where it's sort of like, if I had to think about like, well, how do I make a salad dressing? Like, I love to cook. So I a lot of this is like second nature for me. I can just sort of tell when it's right. And this is like too much acid, too much oil, but if I had to make that knowledge explicit and write a recipe for something that I normally only ever make off the top of my head, you have to encode that information in a completely different way. You're not feeling your way through your methodology. You're really having to explain it in a way that's unambiguous and that another person can understand. And it does help you to gain a much deeper understanding of your own knowledge. Yeah. So I think that's definitely a benefit to doing it.
Okay, so let's switch gears here. I've decided that I am a good candidate for a book. I got something pretty cool that I developed. A lot of people like to hear me talk about it. They say it's original. I think that I could make more money by getting it out to more people. I'm going to do a book. Now what?
Right. So
I mean, I'm not going to ask you about writing the book, but
now what in terms of like steps, or now what in terms of like, I think first of all, you want to validate your decision. And that's something that you and I touched on earlier also, Mark. And again, I think that, so let's just look at scenario A and scenario B. Scenario A, I'm going to call it scenario B. Scenario B is the one where you really just want to put this out there as a validator, as a business card, as a, credential. If that's the case, then really you just have to ask yourself, am I prepared to put in what is required in order to see this project through? Even a book that is self-published, and if you're going to DIY your way through the self-publishing process instead of even if you want to keep your investment relatively low and you're not going to take 5 years to get it done, you just want to kind of crank it out as soon as possible, it's still an enormous undertaking. It's a huge bunch of work. So you have to be sure that you're going to see it through and that it makes sense for you to do it. That you have realistic expectations about what you're going to gain out of it. Now, scenario A, I would say, is I went backwards there, kind of up the list from bottom to top. But scenario A, I think, is for the person who's like, I want to share this with the world. Like you said, I have this methodology. People have told me that they're interested in it. Is it worth it? now you really need to kick the tires on your capacity, on your own idea. I am of the opinion that, and I know a lot of publishing professionals would chime in and agree with me on this one. What is the most essential quality for you to have as an author who's going to make a real impact, and not just, you know, have a kind of a clickable PDF that you can download, but really have a book that people read and recommend.
Mm-hmm.
What is most important is the strength of your idea. It's not, so there are two components to this quality book. One is, what do you have to say? And then how good are you at saying it? So your writing skill and talent, both are important. And if you have both, you will rise to the top and be of interest to publishers. And if you have a platform as well, you know, then the sky's the limit for you. But it's really, really important for you to know, am I a good writer, or do I have a good idea? And if you're weak in the writing, the strength of your idea can see you through, because you can get help through a ghostwriter or a co-author. Absolutely. There are lots and lots of, you know, very famous, successful, best-selling authors who have published this way. If you have
Winston Churchill.
I mean, so many, like really in the nonfiction space, almost, you know, many of them. And that's why you see a lot of double-barreled, you know, bylines on books. Sometimes they'll team up with a journalist or something to help, you know, make that information. It's the strength of the idea. And I happen to think that that is more important than the quality of the writing. However, having said that, you can have like a so-so idea, but be an incredibly entertaining, lyrical, creative writer. And that book can, even an information book can kind of like carry you a long way, just because it's a great read. So you have to be either super strong in one of those, or pretty strong in both. If you're weak in both of those areas, I really implore you not to do it.
Yeah.
There are 2 million books published every year. Most self-published books never sell more than 200 copies.
Wow.
And I do not count, you know, free downloads, because people download them to their right to the trash, right to the trash, right? But in terms of like actual sales, it's incredibly competitive. It's not worth doing if you don't at least have a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that's the very first thing. And when I say a good idea, what I'm talking about is something that is original and important. If your book, you know, it has to be original and it has to be substantial in some way. So, you know, is this something that is relevant? Is it really going to help someone? Or am I kind of like puffing myself up a bit? There's no room for that kind of bullshit.
Well, it's funny because, I mean, it takes you right back to the whole idea of a brand. A brand needs to be an idea that you have, that this is what I'm bringing into the world and it's important. But more important is the person on the other end of the brand who goes, so what? Or, oh my God, where have you been all my life? Most people never get that other person, because it hurts to have somebody say, you know what, not so good. Your baby's not that good looking. And you go, that's my baby. You know? Nobody wants to hear that, which I think a lot of authors labor under this misperception that they're creating something great when everybody looks at it and goes, oh, you know?
Well, and we're all surrounded by people who love us, hopefully. You know, we all have folks in our corner who not only don't want to hurt us, but they're coming at us with not, you know, the sort of like, you know, they're not objective. They really sincerely do see us in a glowing light. And they may not have the industry tested perspective to in order, you know, so you may have, you know, people come up to you and say like, you got to write a book, you got to write a book, you got to write a book. I ask you, are those people knowledgeable about the book industry, and do they know what actually consumers really buy? Do they know what people who don't know you and don't care about you will buy? If they don't know that, then you really have to take their, you know, their encouragement means a lot. But in terms of like a green light to go pursue this very, very challenging road, take it with a grain of salt, and you know, get some advice from people who know. And that's where the gatekeepers come in. I think there's still a place for that. You know, you just as investors are going to be, you know, sort of, if you're looking for investment, seed money in your company, the investors are going to be like, yes, you got to dazzle them with your pitch, but at the end of the day, they can see all the cracks in your presentation. And if it's not rock solid, they're not going to back it. And there's a good reason why. And you need to be as rigorous when assessing yourself. And when you think about that,
I also believe it's from that, you know, master of classical thought, David Lee Roth. He said, you know, I think he compared rock and roll to falling down 9 times and getting up 10 times. And I think that's,
I think it depends on how much drugs you do before the show, but sure.
Well, yeah. And he also said chicks, 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 right? Which is an
Right.
immortal quote right up there with Shakespeare. But David Lee Roth said that, and I always took that as you know, you always talk about the band, the one hit, the overnight, the 10-year overnight success.
Right.
Van Halen was one of those bands. And I think a lot of people too, they say, I'm going to write a book, and they go, oh, that's kind of crap. And they go, oh, I guess you're right. But I think you can take feedback from people who you think are bitch slapping you, but actually are just trying to give you tough love and push you maybe to develop that one little idea that is good and throw out the 99% that's garbage. And you keep going back at it. I think it can be a wonderful transformative experience, and it makes you better as a consultant or a entrepreneur.
I agree. You know, there's only, like, we all need cheerleaders, but cheerleaders alone do not make you a fast runner or whatever. I'm trying to, you know,
that was David Lee Roth too.
You have to put in the training. You have to put, you know, you have to really take it seriously. So we had some other questions to get to. So that's kind of that. There's my big.
You know, the one
I'm just dissuading.
I don't even remember all the other questions, but there's one big one that I want to ask.
Yeah,
there's one big one. Okay, I've decided I want to do this. I've got a manuscript. There are different ways for me to publish.
Yeah.
Now what?
So I'm so excited to share this with you, because this is an area of mass confusion, and a lot of what I do is helping people to sift through the morass. Okay, so the difference between the 3 modes of publication are traditional publishing, hybrid publishing, and self-publishing. So we're going to go through this, and let me just also say that I've got a webinar coming up in 3 weeks where I'm going to go and take a deep dive on this and really look at what are the differences between the 3 modes of publication and what does it take to be successful in each. But let me touch on them.
That's important, because everybody who's watching this video, go to the show notes, because we will put a link in. Do we have the link to the webinar already?
I have it. I just haven't shared it with you yet, but immediately after this, we'll share it with you. And I've got a graphic that people can reference. Yeah.
After the show, folks, take a look at the show notes and sign up for the webinar if you're at all interested in this stuff, because I think it'll be a good one. I'll be there. So there's a
lot to parse.
Webinar, get smart.
Thank you. Yeah, so there's a lot to parse. So, okay, I'm going to try to boil it down as succinctly as possible. The traditional publishing model is as such. It is the publishers. So there are 3 things that we need to think about and think about, like, who is the owner and controller of these 3 elements. One is the financial investment. One is the professional, the work associated with developing this book into a product. And the third is the route to market. So in the traditional model, it is the publisher's product. So they are the investor. They put all of the money into its development, including sometimes, but not always, giving the author an advance against future royalties. So what that means is that because they are the underwriter of that, it is their product. They have productized your information and turned it into a thing that they can sell and that they own and control. It's their thing, right? You know, like any product development. The second element of it, the work involved, the publisher is responsible for the quality of all of the professional collaborators and contributors that make the book a reality. So that's number 2. And third, a route to market. The publisher will have traditional distribution, which I'll also get into, and it's a whole other topic in my webinar in greater depth, but how do books get into stores? There's a very long established, deeply physical, set of, it's a supply chain, set of processes, right? So that publisher will have not just the trucks and the order book and everything, but the sales agents that will get that book into stores around the country and around the world. And usually traditional publishers will also play a role in selling or licensing the rights, translation rights of their authors. So that means getting your book translated into German and Chinese and everything else. So those three elements, the traditional publisher holds them all. And that's why you as the author will make the least money. You're basically saying, please take this thing in my head and my heart and make it into a product and just give me a piece of that, because you're going to do all the work and make all the investments. Got it. Okay, self-publishing is exactly the opposite. The author is taking the role of publisher. So the author will make the entire investment. The author is responsible for all of the work of all of the contributors, whether they perform those functions themselves or decide that they don't need an editor, or whether they hire a company, at sometimes great expense, to be their assisted self-publishing service provider. They're still responsible for it. Not just responsible for paying for it, but responsible for making all of the professional and creative decisions around it. And that is key. They're coming at it, they must bring an industry. Anyway, I'm not even going to get into how important it is to know what you're doing when you're trying to run that project. And then the third element of that is about route to market. In the self-publishing universe, you have no ability to participate in traditional distribution. You will not get your book into stores across the country. You will not do that. And I can't hammer that home hard enough. There are many self-publishing outfits that say we have global distribution, and what they mean is that you'll be listed on a wholesaler's catalog. That does not mean that anyone is selling your book to that independent bookstore in Toledo or whatever. So you're basically going to be reaching customers through e-commerce only. Hybrid publishing is a hybrid of those two things. So it is the author's product because they are the investor in it. They can come along and say, go, we're doing this book. And it's on my time frame and on my dime. And they also then are the owner of it and the main beneficiary of its sales. However, they are hiring the publisher, the hybrid publisher, for their professional expertise. So the hybrid publisher provides all of the work and takes responsibility for the quality of the work. The hybrid publisher also provides the route to market through traditional distribution. And this is really, really important. I want to just mention, Mark, that I am a board member at the Independent Book Publishers Association, IBPA. And IBPA also has self-publishing authors within its ranks and hybrid publishers as well as traditional. A couple of years ago, a committee that I was on was responsible for drafting the IBPA's official criteria for what is a hybrid publisher and what is not. And one of the most important items on that is that the hybrid publisher must have the ability to get the book into stores. They're not just going to flip it up on Amazon. So those are the three routes. I know that we're almost at the end of the half hour, but
that's why you've got a 30-minute webinar. It's part 2.
Yeah, exactly. But I do want to just quickly touch on, what it takes to be successful in each of that. At the bottom, the bottom line is sales. And I know that people hate to hear this because, people say to me, Maggie, I don't want to make money off my book. I just want to impact a lot of people and I want people to read it. Guess what? It's the same thing, It's the same thing. It's
so true. It's what it does. It's padding. It's protecting your ego.
Well, it just means that, listen, if people are buying your book in large numbers, it means they are reading it and recommending it to people. So, okay, both things achieved. If people are reading and being impacted by your book, it means they bought it. So they're the same thing. At the end of the day, it's about persuading people to go will you spend $20 and, 8 to 10 hours of your life with this? Yes, I feel like I'm going to get, that's going to be worth my time to spend time with that. So at the end of the day, it's sales. If you're going into the retail market, either through a traditional publisher or a hybrid publisher, you absolutely have to have consumer appeal. You have to have consumer appeal to strangers. If you're self-publishing, you have to have consumer appeal. You have to have access to a ready audience that will buy it directly from you. Not because you're better than the blockbusters on the bookshelf, but because they know you and trust you, and they are curious about what you have to share. So if you don't have either of those things going, if you have both of them going for you, the world is your oyster and you can take any of those 3 routes. But if you don't have either of those things going for you, you really ought to be doing it as a passion project and investing as little as possible.
And there's nothing wrong with that, right?
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is, again, it's about getting your goals and your capacity into alignment.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful journey of self-discovery, figuring out, what, screw it. I made a New Year's resolution. Don't care if it's good or not. I'm just going to do it. Great. Or I believe I got something big and important enough, and people have told me that I want to do this. I want to bulletproof it, and I want to be consequent about it, and I want to take the abuse of actually bringing it to the world.
And I'm willing to go the distance and do the hard work. Yeah. I'm willing to really take it seriously and spend a couple of years of my life, you know, putting time and effort toward it. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. But you know, both of those things are valid. And for some folks, it's just like, I got to get this off my chest. That's great. As long as you know that there's only going to be a handful of people ever reading it, most likely. And if that's okay with you, then absolutely go for it. And as to what you should spend, again, it depends on what you have. I wouldn't bet the farm on a long shot ever. And I don't really advise people. I'm really, really cautious about who we let into our program, partly based on, you know, the realism of their expectations. And what I understand is, like, you know, how deep are their pockets? Like, is this an easy investment for them to make, or are they putting everything into it and really, really depending on it paying back and then some? And you know, how strong is their material, and do we think that we can get them there? It's a very, very important calculation to make, and I think anybody undertaking it should take it really carefully.
That's an awesome sentiment to finish on. Yeah, because I mean, the last thing you want is somebody walking into the ocean based on, you know, but you told me. You know, and I think the world is full of you told me's, and my mom said I'm good looking. The world is full of that. And I think this is a wonderful exercise. It's also good for entrepreneurs. That's why I think entrepreneurs are set for this, is because they made the conscious decision to do something hard. Otherwise they would have gone and work for the government. They made the decision to do something hard and trust themselves and get bounced around. So I think they might be wired for this. And I think that this session has been super valuable for me, I hope for other folks, in just clarifying that it's okay if you're just going to put it out there for yourself. And there is a way, and there's somebody, Maggie, I could talk to, or a webinar I could go to figure out, maybe I should choose the put it out in the world route. So this has been super helpful.
Mark, can I just end on one last piece of advice? I know that, you know, you and I just spoke briefly about this idea of kind of like bite-sized content, and is that a book or isn't it? I think that, you know, for a lot of entrepreneurs that have some information to share that would bolster their business and help their customer base, just, you know, perhaps de-link yourself from the notion of like, this has to be a book. Should I get a publisher? It is perfectly valid to put out content products, you know, a whole suite of them. You know, it can be one sort of like series of downloadable PDFs or tools or worksheets or whatever, or, you know, one after the other. You can make money that way. You can have influence that way. And that may be more appropriate than even getting tangled up in this whole sort of like publishing book, self-publishing universe. Like, just view it for its own thing and validate that for its own purpose.
Well, that's how this whole group started. Brand DIY came about because I wrote one of those. I call it 2 Trips to the Toilet book. And it's one of those, and it basically summarizes the process that I go through with every client on building a brand. It's called Brand DIY. You can branddiy.com. You can download the book thing, whatever it is, the book-ish. And that's how this group started, because the guys who are doing SEO on my website said, you know, a lot of guys are downloading this thing. Why don't you start a group so folks can come together? There you go. So the silver lining isn't always being one of the best-selling authors. It can lead you to other stuff, which this did. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think we're in a very exciting time.
You are going to send me the link to your webinar, and I'm going to sign up, and I'm going to blurb it. And I'm also going to make sure that you're mentioned so folks can just click on your name in the Brand DIY group and ask you for information and help and all that kind of stuff. And let's see where she goes.
Awesome. Well, it's been great talking to you, Mark. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to chat with the folks in the group.
Stay safe out there.
You too. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.